Hello, everyone. Pastor George here, and this week for our Theologs, I want to be talking about apologists because over this past weekend, as I'm sure some of you who are in the know as far as Christian things are concerned, there was some sad news that Ravi Zacharias, who's a very famous Christian apologist, uh, is going to be most likely passing away this week from bone cancer. And he's 74, 75 or something like that. So he's up there, and it's not necessarily the saddest thing in the world in terms of that, in terms of life being cut too short. He's done a lot of great work over his time. I'm going to talk about him more later this week, maybe when he does pass away or something like that. But I just wanted to talk about apologetics in general because it's kind of on my mind right now. So what is apologetics? So I'll start with that. Apologetics is a word that does not mean to apologize, though that is where they have the same root. In Greek, apologetic actually meant to make a defense for. So apologetics is the study of or the engagement of defending something, especially Christianity, which is where it is usually was first kind of coined to use it as the term. And most time when people talk about apologetics now, they're talking about Christian apologetics. So that's what it is. And of course, apologists are people that do it. And there have been many famous apologists throughout church history, but I want to focus actually in the modern period for this next 5 days, because those are the ones that I am most familiar with. I think that it would be great if I could recommend books or whatever at the end of each one that you guys can check out for yourselves. So the first one we're going to do is someone who is actually more well known as a writer than as an apologist, but kind of actually set the standard for many apologists today. And the reason I think he is important to read is not because I think his fiction is good. Actually, many of you know I take pot shots at his fiction quite often, but that I think he laid the groundwork and that he does a lot of good thinking. And it shows for all of you lay people out there that you can do these things without having to be an ordained minister. You can study these things and become an expert at them without having to go to seminary or without having to become ordained. And I think that lives into the Protestant ideal of everyone being a priest, right? That's some priesthood of all believers. And part of being a priest is being able to defend the Christian faith. So, if you haven't figured out who I'm talking about yet, it is C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, but his most famous book, and I think his most important book, is Mere Christianity, which I read for the first time, actually, earlier this year. And it was an absolute treat. It's a little dated because it was written in the 1940s. It was actually written during World War II, of all times. And so it has lots of references to that. But it still is incredibly important because C.S. Lewis gets at the heart of a lot of the questions that people ask in the world. Why do we know such and such a thing is true? Why do we confess, the Trinity? All of these types of things. And he deals with all of them in a very good way, and a way that people can understand, which is why Mere Christianity, people actually describe themselves, I've heard this many of time, as a Mere Christianity Christian, in the sense that they were convinced by what he had to say, or that they believe that you can kind of leave all of this heady doctrine stuff on the side and just deal with the very basic tenets of Christianity, which C.S. Lewis talks about in that book. And even though he wasn't going on speaking tours and doing all these types of things, he did have a radio show where he would read sections of Mere Christianity during the war. But he also has this interesting life story of originally being an atheist and then being challenged later in life through various means, most famously through meeting J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And then they had their own conversations, and eventually C.S. Lewis came to be a Christian. And he speaks out of that journey of being a non-believer and then becoming one. But in doing so, he also benefits people who grew up in the church who maybe never thought about these things. So if you're looking for a really simple book to recommend to someone, a really good read, I highly recommend C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. So that's C.S. Lewis. We're going to be talking about a Catholic priest tomorrow who is actually incredibly foundational in my life. So I hope to see you then, and I always encourage you, keep studying. All right, be healthy.